Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you to all of you for joining today's Prime Wellness webinar. My name is Kyle Bingham, and I will be moderating today's webinar. As you can see with today's topic, we're going to be talking about savings towards your retirement goals and answering that question of how much is enough. And I think that when you look at all of the different pieces that make up financial wellness, the topic of retirement is always going to be one of those top priorities. And today we'd like to share with you some different tips and tricks and even some rules of thumb that can help you to start to make that assessment. Joining me today are two of our educators, Kenji Noguchi and Josh Zeb. They're two of the individuals that are out working with all of the individual employees that we work with on a day-to-day basis. And so they'll be able to definitely provide some very valuable insight about some of the challenges that they're seeing, and also just kind of walk you through what a lot of their conversations look like when they're discussing retirement, retirement planning, retirement readiness, and such. As we kick things off, I think that one of the most important things to acknowledge is that there are a number of different variables that have to be considered when you start to ask yourself, am I ready for retirement, or am I on track for retirement? And we're going to incorporate in some of these variables into some of the questions we're going to discuss today. First and foremost, one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that individuals are living longer. And so that means there's going to be a longer period of time where you're going to need to have that retirement paycheck or that income. And so as you start to measure how close or how far you are from your retirement goals, factoring in this component of longevity becomes very important. We're leading healthier lives and we're living longer than ever. We also have to make an acknowledgement that individuals are much more responsible for saving for their own retirement. There's been a big shift from defined benefit plans or pensions to now defined contribution plans like your 401ks and 401(b)(3)s. So it is important that each of you that are tuning in today are answering these questions that we're going to talk about today, and that you understand how you can measure how close or how far you are from retirement success, because again, there is a lot of responsibility that is placed on your shoulders. And then again, like I said, the question of am I on track for retirement, it's an important one, and there can be some gray areas there, right? Because you've got to be thinking about how much you're saving, how much longer you're going to save for, how long is your money going to grow? Are you experiencing enough growth within your account? These are all factors that need to be worked out as you start to answer that question for yourself. And then also, do we need to start to look at changing our financial outlook? I think our main goal today is to help you all to feel confident about the decisions that you're making. And I think it's important to acknowledge that retirement is going to look different for each and every one of you. And it's very common that as people are going throughout their working years and throughout their careers, they do need to make adjustments to different things, whether it's their investment strategy or whether it's when they're planning to retire. Maybe it's something like relocating to a new state that has a lower cost of living. These are all different variables. And so I encourage you, as you're thinking through this, to understand that you do need some flexibility as you're starting to really look at what is your outlook look like right now, and what changes might be on the horizon for you. Now with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Kenji here for a few moments, and he's going to walk you through life expectancy. Like, what does that mean, and how do we need to essentially kind of incorporate life expectancy into our retirement planning decision? So Kenji, why don't you walk us through these next couple of slides?
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate that intro there. And, you know, for everyone here, when we think about retirement, we have to talk about longevity. And why does that even matter when we're planning for retirement, or how do we even get there? So what we're looking at here is a chart, and this is illustrating the probability of living to certain ages if you're 65 today. Now, a lot of good data here, but the main things that we want to hone in on is, well, the first example, there's a 73% chance that at least one member of a couple will live to age 90. And we'll see that in those blue bars right in the middle of our page there. Now, even individually, when we break that down, we can say 72% of women and 63% of men in excellent health are expected to live to at least age 85. Again, the green for the men and the purple for the women here. So really what we're getting at here is, again, our technology, our medicine is getting better as years go by, and people are living longer. And we have to keep in mind, what is our health and what are our habits to get us there? So, I like this slide personally because when we think about retirement planning, well, we see the differences in health where the non-smokers in excellent health are going to be in that lighter hue, and just the population average is going to be in the darker hues there per gender or as a couple. So again, right, when we think about that, if you're a non-smoker, you're going to probably have easier healthcare needs compared to someone who's smoking a pack every day. And of course, these things are going to impact our financial planning. Well, when we get to retirement, it's not only what's my inflows and outflows, it's am I covering my healthcare? So I mentioned that example because it's not just only about living longer, it's about funding a potentially 25 to 35 year retirement. And we have to plan for the average life expectancy, but even if that's not enough, we have to extend our planning beyond that because we're just living longer and we need to ensure that we're going to be able to cover those needs in retirement. So, with that, we're always going to recommend, hey, that we have to be honest with our scenarios. What's our expectation and what's our reality? So if we take that thought, most of us are likely to live well into our 80s or even 90s, especially as part of a couple. The main challenge we're going to face is that we just probably aren't going to work as long as we plan to. And that can create a serious gap, from our savings, our longevity, or even just our financial plan in general. And we'll see that here on the left-hand side. So let's point that out. 68% of current workers expect to retire at age 65 or older. What happens? Only 31% of them actually did. So that median expected retirement age is 65 here. And, the reality is most people are actually retiring at age 62. So where's the gap here, right? Why are people planning to work longer, knowing that, hey, we're living longer, we need to have retirement set up for ourselves, and we're actually retiring earlier than what we expect? And, it's right there in the middle of our screen here. It's going to be a lot of those different things, whether it's health problems or disabilities, it's a company downsizing, or heck, maybe it's even needing to care for an immediate family member. What's interesting on this slide is only a portion, only 35% of retirees actually retired early because they could afford to, not because they had to. So I think this slide just really underscores, how many retirements are actually unplanned in today's time. And I think the takeaway for me here is that, we need to financially prepare for a longer retirement. We're living longer. What does our work scenario look like? And are we going to last longer than we expect? So again, I think that the message here I'm trying to send is, we need to build flexibility into our retirement plan. It's critical. It's maybe saving more or planning for some of those contingencies, but we just need to ensure our investments are going to continue to grow. So in other words, I guess where I'm going here is we just can't plan to live long. We need to plan to retire smart. And we need to have room for uncertainty, and we need to take steps today that are ensure we're protecting our future. So let's consider all these things, where we're at in work, what's our life expectancy. We can never tell for certain, but what is that expectation at work, and what's going on in my life that make me stop working and maybe retire early here.
Excellent. Thank you, Kenji. And those are some great points. And one of the things that you alluded to was making sure that your money continues to grow, because investment strategy is a really important piece of making sure that you do have that income or that money that you need, especially if retirement is somewhat unexpected and you do retire or have to retire at 62 as opposed to 65. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here. Josh, why don't you kind of walk us through the thought process when you're talking to somebody about how to reach your savings goals, and maybe talk a little bit about compounding interest and investment strategy.
Yeah, no, happy to elaborate on this topic. And I think you mentioned it, but I think the investment aspect is so important. Not just that, but also how much we're saving. So I think it's kind of two pillars we always got to consider when it comes to preparing and saving for retirement. And that being said, I think Kenji and Kyle, I believe you guys would agree that it's never too late. It's never too late to start saving or kind of look at a retirement, what your window might be or what might look like, 20, 30, even 15 years away. So what we wanted to do is kind of take a step back and kind of look at compounding interest. Again, some of you probably have heard of this topic before or kind of already understand it. Kind of the general overview of it is that whenever you are investing or whenever you are having more of a long-term perspective when it comes to investing, it could really have some benefits on your overall account balance. So the way it works really, again, is, you have a certain amount of money. Example one here, we have $5,000. We have a average earnings rate of 7%. And the time frame is 1 year. Okay, after that 1 year, this individual's account balance will be $5,350. Going into the next year, now that's our starting. Now we add 7% to that. Now that adds up on itself again and again and again over time. Again, that's the whole philosophy, is compounding over and over and over again. Now, these changes might not seem very subtle at first, but let's pivot to example 3, where if we do this for 25 consecutive years, yes, we had that starting investment of 5,000, but at year 25, our account balance was $27,000 after just starting with 5. So really, really big impact there when it comes to, again, the consistency of saving and investing. As we move to the next slide, this is kind of setting up this next one where we're going to go through 4 different examples of people who are saving and investing in different ways. Like I said, kind of the main important point is we want to be a consistent saver, but also be an investor that we're supposed to be in or is appropriate for us. So the top individual is in that light blue, if you can see it. Someone that's saved from ages 25 to 65. That's what we like to see from an employee standpoint, of course, is those consistent savers. But they're also earning 7%. So maybe they're invested properly based on their age and risk tolerance. So at age 65, this consistent saver and investor had a portfolio of $512,000 because of it. Let's take a step down here to this purple individual, which is going to be the later investor. Again, I don't consider it too late to start saving, but always, if you have the opportunity to save earlier than later, I definitely recommend that. So this individual started saving at age 35 and then, consistently saved for 30 years. Rather than 40 with that other example. So the purple person here had an account balance of $242,000. That 10-year difference really had the impact on what their account balance was at age 65. So again, really important to think about that. Next, let's go to the gray individual, which is the early investor. This person only put in money for 10 years from ages 25 to 35 and then stopped contributing. Their money was still invested, but again, they stopped contributing after age 35. That person actually beat the purple individual when it came to account balance because of, rather than the consistent years of contributing, it was the consistent years of investing that really helped them out. And then the last individual is going to be this green one, which is going to be the very bottom, which is the consistent saver, which is great, but maybe they weren't invested properly. So their account balance really got affected by that. So you can see at the very bottom, their account balance was the $158,000. So kind of again, overview is we want to make sure we're consistently saving, but we also want to make sure that we're invested properly as well.
Excellent. That's great, Josh. And I think that this highlights a couple of different important points, right? Starting early, saving consistently, also having the right investment strategy. And if we're overly conservative, if we're just sitting in cash, it's going to make it very difficult for us to be able to reach those goals, especially when we're looking at what's going on in the market right now and some of the volatility. And we're going to hit on that in just a little bit, because it's important that we do stay the course and that we do have an appropriate investment strategy despite, you know, what might be going on in the market. Now, as we transition again here, we want to try to give you some rules of thumb to really help you to start to look at, am I on track, and what is my income going to look like? What are the specific goals that I need to be setting for saving, for withdrawing that money in retirement, and how much of my income is going to be replaced? So Kenji, do you want to walk us through this graphic on the screen here and just kind of help folks to understand how they can use these rules of thumb as a good starting point for their assessment?
Absolutely. And you know, we love rules of thumb and frameworks anytime we can use them here. And this is just a great one. So again, we talked about longevity and early retirement. How does that affect our plans? So, you know, the natural question always becomes, well, how do we actually prepare for that? And that's where these three numbers come in. So they represent the simple framework where the 15, our first number, is 15% savings rate. We want to be aiming to save 15% of our income each year towards retirement. And that's going to also include those employer contributions. So if you've ever sat down and had a one-on-one conversation with us, you know, we preach this like gospel and saying, hey, your deferral plus that employer amount, we want you to be shooting for that 15 to 20% total of your income. So that's the first number. Hey, we need to have around a 15% savings rate, and that's going to help build wealth enough to support that retirement that could last 30 and 35 years. Now, the second number, 70. What we're getting at here is that 70% replacement income. Now, the whole reason we say 15 to 20% of that savings rate is so it can reach us to this 70% replacement of income. Generally, you know, analysts and projections rough out that if we're saving 15 to 20% total, that's going to replace 70% of our pre-retirement income that we have today. So what's the message with that? Well, if we want to maintain our lifestyles, well, we're going to have to save for them. And maybe if we want to have a more lavish lifestyle in retirement, we'll have to save more, or vice versa, right? We'll have to play that balancing act. So it's common to see, right? Expenses might go down. You might downsize a home, maybe move into a different area when you're actually in retirement. But those other costs, healthcare, travel, those often go up. So we have to keep that in mind too. The very last number here is that 4% withdrawal rate. And if you've ever heard of this, what that's getting at is, hey, it's a common rule of if we pulled 4% from our savings each year out of the retirement account, we likely wouldn't run out of money. And that's based on historical data and, you know, assuming we have a balanced portfolio, that's going to ensure, hey, we're pulling out enough that's not going to blow up our account right away as we enter retirement. So let's tie it all together. When we think of these three numbers, 15, 70, and 4, you know, these hopefully are actionable steps for you to give you a roadmap to say, well, am I, first of all, intentionally saving enough? Am I spending sustainably? And, you know, am I planning confidently as I look forward of how much am I going to actually need when I get there? So whether you're ahead, behind, or just starting, you know, exactly as Josh said, we're not playing a judging game here. We just want to give you these numbers so you have clarity and control over your future. Now, one thing I think many of times people ask us too is, well, okay, well, where do I start? Now, this is a handy graph just to show you exactly, you know, what's that annual savings rate that you should be saving if you have $0 saved for retirement today. Now, what you'll see here is age-based and then income-based at the top, and really you'll just find that area, where am I falling in my age and what's my average household income, and I'll give you that deferral percentage that you should likely be saving to replace that 70%. So the example here, right, let's say I'm 40 years young, I have household income of around 50,000, and I've got nothing saved for retirement. Well, if we'll use the chart here, you know, well, hey, we should be saving at least 12% of our own income, and that's not necessarily going to count the employer match money here, but that's how much we should be saving if we want to take home, you know, 70% of that 50K when we retire. So again, just a handy tool to utilize and use. And, you know, maybe I'll just speak to one thing of when folks ask, you know, hey, you mentioned that 4% rule. does that even still apply in 2025 with how our markets are going and, you know, all these different yields are going crazy? Well, one thing I'll just say is yes, you know, but with caveats here. Essentially, it's still just a good rule of thumb for basic planning, saying, hey, I need 4% out. If I'm saving this much and I need to pull 4% out, it'll give you that starting point, at least a rule of thumb. And, you know, it still works reasonably well with a balanced portfolio in today's time. But we just, again, I mentioned that because as of lately, it feels as if many are choosing to start lower, saying, hey, maybe I use a 3.5 withdrawal rate and maybe a little bit lower, even to 3 earlier on retirement. So now I have some flexibility with pulling that money out in more dynamic manner. Maybe when the markets return and become stronger, I'll pull out more and I'll adjust that annually based off of my needs. So again, I just wanted to mention that here, but using this graph in tangent with that 1574 kind of framework or guideline is going to really help you get on track.
Excellent, great. Yeah, these are some great guidelines, Kenji, and I think, again, what we're trying to help all of you today with is just kind of really starting to pinpoint where you need to be from a savings standpoint. And again, there's not going to be a right or wrong answer. Really what we're trying to do is make sure that we're pointed in the right direction, and then we can refine the strategies from there. Now, as we move on, we talked about it a little bit earlier. There's been a lot of volatility in the market. And so, Josh, why don't you kind of walk us through the mentality when you're thinking about your retirement savings and the type of investment strategy you should have, especially when markets are going a little bit crazy. What's the mindset that folks should have?
Yeah, I think the mindset is, you know, I think these all the investors on, you know, you should be comfortable and understand your investment strategy. That's should be one of the main objectives, is really understanding how you're invested, making sure you're comfortable with it. What tends to happen when people get uncomfortable, they make maybe a rash or emotional decision when that could really hurt their account. So what we have here is we just wanted to show you a reference of maybe kind of hypothetically, if you dump $10,000 back in 2004, what would your account balance theoretically look like? And again, this is a little out of date, it says 2004 to 2023, but we had $10,000 and we dumped that into an S&P 500 index. That's really, I think, a good representation of how the market is when it comes from a volatility standpoint even. So even with all that volatility over 20 years, this individual came up with $63,000 from, again, that $10,000 investment about 20 years ago. So really important. They didn't touch their money, they didn't move it, they didn't you know, change it in and out or anything like that. Again, they just kind of parked it and looked at it 20 years later. Now, those people who saw the volatility and maybe wanted to move out of the market at an incorrect time or when things were really low, well, what we see on here in the table, it says 7 of the best 10 days occur within 2 weeks of the worst 10 days. So what that really means is a lot of those worst days are backed with some of the best days. So whenever you're moving money at some low points, you might be missing out on some potential returns. So what we see here is if someone misses the best 10 days, their account balance essentially would be cut in half theoretically of what it could have been. Miss the best 20 days, you know, again, cut half again and again. So again, consistency is so key when it comes to investing. We just want to make sure everyone's invested properly inside of whatever accounts they may have and make sure they understand that. That's really important. One thing I wanted to kind of go back to was what Kenji said about the savings. I think that's such an important aspect of how much we're savings. And I know that 15-point mark or percentage part that Kenji mentioned before might be something that looks really intimidating right now, but Kyle, as we go to the next slide, something that you guys might have the opportunity to do is called an auto escalation feature on some of your retirement plans. This is kind of the idea of an automatic deferral increase of, you know, you could do 1 or 2% per year, but I think this is a good way to, especially if you're starting out low, to get up to those higher points over time. even if it's not right away, but if you're consistently going up and up and up and up, it could really help out and it can really impact how much you have for your overall savings here. So if we have the example here, the two I wanted to focus in on is the purple, which is the consistent 10% saver. And then right underneath that is that auto escalation individual. So they started from 3% and added all the way up to 10% over time, so over 7 years. And you can see their account balances were relatively closely from that consistent increase in savings over time. So just to kind of reiterate what Kenji was saying, it would be really good and impactful if you're able to do these baby steps to get to those high percentage points.
Yeah, that's a great point, Josh. And I think that, again, just to highlight that with the green section, it's somebody starting out at just 3%. That's manageable, that's doable. And this auto escalation allows for those gradual increases, and it's still going to get you to those same goals as compared to that person that may have been starting out at a higher initial contribution rate. And even if you don't have auto escalation as a feature, you can set a reminder for yourself that at the beginning of each year, when you're going through your budget and just kind of assessing, the upcoming year, have a reminder just to increase that contribution percentage by, as little as 1%. And obviously, if you can do more, even better. But those small changes can really lead to a significant difference down the road. So let's just take a moment here and recap a couple of things and provide each of you with some takeaways. First off, we have to start to think of retirement as this period of life that is going to be a considerable amount of time for the large majority of us. And so it is important that even if you're 30 years from retirement, it's important that you start to at least have a general understanding of kind of where you're at right now and what you're on track to have. And I know that many of you have sat down with your advisor or with one of our consultants in the past. One of the simplest and easiest things that you can do, just log on to your record keeper's website. That's the company, the organization that holds your 401k, and look at some of their different calculators on there. Nearly all record keepers now will have something on there that's showing here's what you're on track to have based upon how much you've saved and what you're currently saving. That's a great starting point that you can use, and I would encourage all of you to, as you're going through and looking at some of those income forecasts, that you take an opportunity to sit down with Kenji or Josh, or if you're working with a different advisor, just sit down and kind of walk through some of those calculations. That's a really big next step. Also, at the same time, you can start to look at your investment strategy. If it's been a while since you've really even looked at the investment strategy, or maybe it's been a year or two since you've even talked to anybody about your investment strategy, this can be a great reminder to have that conversation and make sure that you are invested properly, that you have the appropriate risk level in your portfolio based upon your age and when you're currently planning to retire. And it can be a good opportunity to kind of evaluate if maybe some changes need to be made. And remember, just take into account what Josh talked about of have a plan and an investment strategy that you're comfortable with, that you also know is going to provide you with the growth that you need, and be disciplined enough to be able to stay the course and understand that markets will go up, markets will go down. But again, as you saw on the chart that Josh shared, even missing out on a couple of the best days after a market correction, it can cut your portfolio in half or even more compared to whatever that loss might have been in the short term. Staying the course is very important. I always say that market volatility, it can be a double-edged sword. At times it might be your worst enemy, but at the same time it can be your best friend, and that's why the investment strategy is so important. And then lastly, just a couple other quick points to make here. Assess your budget, look for opportunities to maybe save a little bit more. make sure you're getting that full company match, or make it a goal to auto escalate or escalate those contributions so you're getting that full company match. Try to make that automatic. Automate your savings whenever possible so you really don't even see that money. It just goes right into your 401k. And just remember that 1% can make a big difference. Again, like I said, I think that all of our educators, our consultants are here to help you. Feel free to scan that QR code and you'll be able to set an appointment with them to discuss anything that we talked about today. And don't forget to sign up for next month's webinar for May. We're going to be talking about withdrawals. We alluded to the 4% rule a little bit. We're going to dive more into that concept. So for those of you that are getting closer to retirement, this will be a fantastic webinar for all of you to attend. And with that, I just want to thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to be here. Keep an eye out for an email from us. It is going to have a link to today's recording, so you'll be able to go back and revisit everything that we talked about today. And thank you again for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.